Good afternoon, everyone. We'll let the rest of the crowd trickle in as we begin our most recent session of Tempe Accelerates. Today we're going to be talking about, first, housing services. This is an opportunity for the various groups who are working on performance measurements to come present to their fellow city employees and get feedback, thoughts, and ideas about what they're doing and how they might even do it, be exposed to ideas they might not have thought of. So we appreciate you being here, and with that I'll introduce Teresa James and Lavon Mamie, who are here to talk about housing services. So it's all yours.
So we are going to talk about our housing performance measurement.
So today we're going to be discussing priority 3 for quality of life as it applies to the council priority.
Our performance measurement is to achieve a housing choice voucher program optimization rate, of either 98% of our available vouchers leased or 99% of our available funding spent.
So why does this matter? The City of Tempe Housing Services Division receives roughly $8.5 million per year in federal funds that come through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. But it's actually not quite that simple.
It's complicated. But before we go into those complicating factors, I want to share that the intent of the program is to provide low-income families with housing that is decent, safe, sanitary, and really importantly, affordable. As many of you know, affordable housing is difficult to access in any part of this country, including Tempe.
So in order to participate on the Housing Choice Voucher Program or the Section 8 program, one of the factors is you have to be income eligible. The maximum income you can receive upon entering the program is 50% of the area median income. For context, within the city limits of the City of Tempe, a family of 4 can make no more than $33,100 a year, or they don't qualify because they're over income.
The average participant in our Housing Choice Voucher Program is a single mom raising her children on an average annual salary of $13,000.
So, and for additional context on that, 43% of the participants on our program are on some type of fixed income, whether it's Social Security, disability, annuity, or pension. Another 42% of the participants are single-headed households with children.
The Housing Choice Voucher Program therefore subsidizes the gap between what the participant family can afford to pay and what the actual cost of housing is.
So for the program, we expect our participants to pay 30% of their adjusted monthly gross income towards their rent. HUD has said 30% for rent and utilities should be the maximum any family pays, whether you're on subsidized housing or not, for your housing and utilities. The way our program works is we validate your income. We'll go in. If you're on Social Security and you get $700 a month, we expect you to pay $210 a month towards your rent. Now, for the sake of argument, if you live in a one-bedroom apartment that costs $900 a month, you pay $210, we'll pay the difference. On average, our participants receive $772 a month in assistance.
So balancing the amount of funding that we have available with the number of vouchers that we're able to utilize is a very difficult, challenging process, and we're going to talk a little bit about those factors.
One of the largest factors that goes into how we calculate the maximum subsidy per household is the fair market rent. Every year, Housing and Urban Development, HUD, goes out and does a national survey and determines what the actual market rate rents are for all unit sizes, from a 0-bedroom efficiency unit all the way up to a 6-bedroom rental house. From there, they push the information down to us. We then look at the local factors. So we'll look at living in all 4 of the zip codes, the census tracts. We also look at high rent districts. So if you want to live within a mile of the university, obviously that's going to be a lot more expensive than it is the further you live away. All of that goes into part of the calculation in determining maximum subsidy. The other thing that we evaluate is family sizes. You know, 2 people who live in a 1-bedroom apartment are going to require a much different subsidy than a family of 6 living in a 4-bedroom house. Our program also requires, and it's a regulatory requirement, that 75% of our participants can make no more than 30% of the area median income.
Further complicating our whole equation is the fact that our annual funding is based on our previous year's spending. So it's critical that we monitor this regularly and that we use that funding, we lease up as many people as we can with vouchers so that we can sustain the program moving forward into the future.
Part of that funding, our funding mechanism is based on Congress. Congress approves the federal budget. They dole the money out to the agencies, whether it's HUD, Department of Defense, Treasury, and the others. It is not uncommon when funding priorities change for HUD to come in and do retroactive prorations. A retroactive proration means they go back to January, which is the beginning of our funding year for housing services, and say, well, we told you we were going to give you $8.5 million, but we really only have $8.2 million, and even though it's June, figure out how to stay in budget. So we're constantly trying to balance the number of families we're assisting with the assistance they require and the fact that our budget may change mid-year depending on what Congress decides to do.
Utilizing full funding enables us to serve more low-income families in Tempe, and that's critical. So as of the end of November 2017, we're happy to share that we are at 100% of our funding utilization. On the flip side of that coin, though, we're at 85% leased up. Because of our funding, we're not able to be at 98% lease up rate at this point.
Which is why HUD and Congress have given us the ability to have an either or in what they expect from the housing providers. Because they're aware they're not funding us to lease 100% of our eligibility, we can either spend 99% of our money or have 98% of the households leased.
So these are the strategies that we're going to continue using to achieve optimization.
So one of the things we monitor regularly. Every Monday I process a check run through the specialty housing software that we use. On Tuesday, when that check run is finished processing, we go in and we update our program financials. How many families are on the program? How much did they cost? How much did they cost last month? How many people do I expect on the program through the end of the year? We are never more than 7 days backdated to knowing exactly where our program is so that we can keep as close of an eye on what we're doing as possible.
So what that means from my perspective as the supervisor is that at least once a month, Levon comes into my office with those reports. I then share that information with our direct service folks on a weekly basis at our work group meetings. And when we start to notice that we are losing vouchers leased or that our funding is decreasing, then I let the staff know that we need to bring more people onto the program, and we start that whole process. And with that, we would love to answer any questions that you have or listen to any feedback that you have.
Got someone over here?
Thank you. My question to this topic is: since you're tracking the participants and then getting them into housing, has there been any fluctuation in the inventory of places that participants can house in? In this current market, it's kind of like a seller's market. Has there been any so-called fluctuations in the inventory?
The Housing Choice Voucher Program, or the Section 8 program, is entirely dependent upon private market landlords being willing to accept our vouchers. So as apartment complexes are bought and sold, some owners may or may not accept the vouchers. As we have to set our payment standard, because we're constantly balancing the number of families we're assisting with the amount of available funding and trying to maximize both. There are times where we're just not able to pay the $1,200 a month rent that you might be able to get from someone else. So the landlord chooses not to participate with us and take an unassisted household. We have had a decrease in available units over the last year. In total inventory of availability, it was about a 2% swing, but it's a constant variation depending on who's doing what.
And it's a constant need for us to recruit new owners and landlords all the time as well.
Thanks for all your work, guys. I think you said at the very beginning, 8 million in vouchers. Is that how much we've given out?
About for 2017 calendar year, as of December 10th, we have spent $8,546,000 in direct housing assistance payments. So that is rent and utilities to folks who participate.
Levon, can you talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that we're putting into place to address Alex's question about inventory, of how we're trying to add affordable housing through the city?
So we're doing landlord outreach, number one, to engage new landlords, bring brand new landlords on the program. We've been having some success there. The other thing that we've been very actively working with is leveraging other federal funding sources that we have, our community development block grant dollars, our home investment program dollars, to where we would purchase units, whether they be condos or single family homes, to have them be permanently affordable rental houses. We also will put part of our money to help developers build affordable housing units in exchange for, for the sake of argument, we'll give X $500,000 to help them build an apartment complex. In exchange, we need Y number of units to be available to affordable housing for X number of years. So we're looking at every mechanism we have at our disposal to increase the amount of housing stock that's for affordables.
Great job, guys. What will it take for us to get to for the HCV utilization, what will it take for us to get to 98%? Is that yeah.
On vouchers?
On vouchers, yeah.
We do not have the budget authority from HUD to get to a 98% utilization rate. In order to do that, we would have to Congress would have to authorize an additional, off the top of my head, $3 million in funding for us to be able to get to the 98%. Because the goal is one or the other. To do that, HUD has not reduced the vouchers that are available. We still have 1,052 vouchers available. They're just not funding us to do that. Every year when they go into their budget process, there's always the very nice hopes and dreams that, hey, we'll try and fund affordable housing at 100% this year, and then just the realities of federal budgeting sets in. So we housing are still judged by both metrics of how many are we leasing and how much are we spending. Even though we cannot assist 100% of the vouchers we have at our disposal, it is still expected that we assist as many vouchers as possible, which is where the payment standard comes in, the fair market rents come in, and then negotiations with private landlords come in and say, I know you want a $100 a month rent increase. Can we split the difference? We'll do $50 a month so that we can maintain the highest level possible of utilization on the vouchers themselves. I mean, to me, the answer to that would be no, because it may be an unachievable goal in the current climate, current funding cycle, But if we lowered the metric from 98%, then what would we lower it to? And then let's say we lowered it to 85%. Well, then once I reach 85%, great, I met my goal. And at least, even if we can't get there, we're always working to get as close as possible with the basic reality of I'm not going to make it, but how close did I get? Am I 10 points off? Am I 9 points off? You know, if I get to 15 points off, there's a little sweat and there's a little upset.
And the reality is we're all committed to housing as many eligible families as possible.
Percentage points equal people, right? These are people who are in search of housing, right? We want to get as many as possible into housing. That makes sense. A question about the eligible properties for vouchers. You know, in Tempe, we've had discussion about tiny homes. We've talked about accessory dwelling units. If someone owns a property in Tempe that is zoned so that they can have an accessory, you know, dwelling unit on their property, is that something that they could be eligible for Section 8 vouchers program if they wanted to be?
Yes. So long as the structure is up to current code and the structure can pass a housing quality standards inspection, which we do with every unit. And it's a basic HQS. We're making sure the HVAC system works, there's no lead-based paint issues, there's no broken windows, no obvious safety hazards. It's like a 19-page inspection, so there's a lot we look at. But provided that it is up to code and it can pass HQS, they can rent it.
Do we have any of those right now that we've looked at and inspected in Tempe?
Currently, no.
No. What about if somebody just wanted to rent a room within their house? They were living there and they said, you know, my kid's in college, I have an extra bedroom. Would that be something that could be eligible for HUD?
Currently, we are not set up to do a shared living arrangement.
Okay.
It would require a significant change in the way this program is administered to be able to do that.
Okay. Right. Any other questions? Feedback? There are forms in the back if you think of things after the session that you want to forward on to the group, you can do that. It does not have to be here, but we certainly encourage you to keep thinking about these topics and to provide that feedback to them. But let's give them a round of applause here. Thank you. Well done. All right. Now let's welcome up the next presenters. Give a chance to have the presentation load up here. Quality of landscape maintenance. All right. Go ahead and introduce yourselves and we'll get going.
Good afternoon, Isaac Shavir, Transportation Maintenance Manager.
Sean Thompson, Landscape Coordinator.
And this afternoon, we're going to talk about the quality of landscape maintenance, which falls under the City Council Strategic Priority 3.23 to be exact. So what is our performance measure? Because it's a lengthy one, I'm going to read it so I'll get it right. Achieve ratings of very satisfied or satisfied with the quality of landscape maintenance along streets, sidewalks, greater than or equal to the national benchmark cities as measured in the community survey. I want to be very clear in terms of what the difference is between the landscape maintenance that's in our public right-of-ways and the difference between what we're going to talk about today versus the responsibility of adjacent property owners. So, and I'll go in the next few slides, I'll talk about our GIS system that basically describes the areas that are responsible, that were responsible, but at the same time, it's still quantified as a totality in the community survey.
So why does this measure matter? Well, what is right-of-way landscape? Well, it's our medians in the roadways, it's landscape adjacent to the roadways, it's some of our firehouses, it's some of our facilities. It's just about over 30% of the right-of-ways is city-owned and maintained by the city. which is about 7.5 million square feet of landscape we maintain, which is a lot. So why is it important? Well, trees and plants and ground cover provide oxygen. You know, they came in with carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. They act as a big air filter. So kind of gets rid of the pollutions and stuff. And the ground cover keeps the dust away and the pollens and stuff like that. Also, trees provide shade, in which helps our residents enjoy their roadways. It beautifies the city. It makes the city look nice. It increases value to our residents. And also this measure is in line with our tree density and our 20-minute city. So what is the goal? We want to provide landscape throughout the city that is attractive to our residents. It doesn't matter if you live on the north side, east side, west side, that you have a nice landscape throughout the city. To provide shade for our residents to ride their bikes, enjoy the sidewalks, and enhance our gateways in our areas. So when people come to see Tempe, they'll go, wow, this is a very, very nice landscape that we have out here. They really maintain it quite well. So what is the target? Well, to achieve this, we have to use our water wisely. We live in Arizona, and there's a lot of heat, and we want to make sure that we are providing the correct amount of water, not too much, but just right to achieve what we want out of these plants and trees that we're providing. For our neighbors to enjoy their gateways into their neighborhoods that they are living in. Right now, our national average is about 54%.
So Sean just gave you guys a 54% average, which is basically off of our community survey. The first baseline data that we have is basically we're at currently 63% of the residents are satisfied with the landscaping. And so the question is, then why not stop there? We've already achieved our goal, right? Well, the ability to be able to make sure that we're trending upward and making sure that our right-of-way landscape is luscious and as Sean mentioned earlier, is obviously a value to our city, a value to our development. It's important that we continue to trend that percentage upward. Another piece of baseline data is the GIS mapping system. We are in our infancy stages of collecting that data via GIS system, and I'll share that information in the next slide here. Landscape assessment, we have the assessment, as you can see, from 2010. That's something that we are currently working on in terms of making sure that we have the most current assessment to make sure that we're working off of current data and we're making data-driven decisions. We currently have a $400,000 maintenance operating budget. Along with that is also a capital improvement program that is also equivalent to that at $400,000 for reinvestment of our public right-of-ways. One bullet to note there is the 150 trees per year that are on average lost to various reasons, disease, storm, et cetera. And that's important to note only because of the fact that the trees are obviously a value to our right-of-ways, and Sean talked about the performance measures that are attributed to the landscape improvements, and those are key to making sure that our right-of-ways look pristine and we have the means necessary to make sure that we're reinvesting and replanting those trees and taking care of them through a maintenance program. Here's the GIS baseline data that we have that I talked about in terms of making sure that we understand the differences between the right-of-ways that we manage and maintain and we have complete control over versus the right-of-ways that are the responsibility of the adjacent property owners. So as you can see on your left-hand side, those are basically the legends of our existing infrastructure that's in place. The shaded areas in blue are areas that are our responsibility and are that are within our full control and that Sean maintains. And anything outside of those boundaries are the adjacent property owners. And he does a really good job in terms of making sure that we're coordinating closely with our code compliance folks and making sure that they too are also doing the same thing as us in terms of making sure that those right-of-ways are well kept.
So how are we collecting the data? Well, we're using boots on the ground. We're utilizing our contractors, city employees to get this information so we can get on the GISI mapping. Our strategies with this is we want to keep with that 5-year assessment. It's a good tool that we use to see where we're at, how we're moving, what direction we're going. Keep up with the capital improvements. We've done wonderful jobs. Everybody remember what Scottsdale Road used to look like and what it looks like now? It's done really well. The tool on this is how do we keep this going without losing the plants and stuff like that? Well, we want to make sure that we're doing our contracts, that we're getting specific things in our contracts that we need. We want to make sure that we have irrigation specialists that are certified. We have people that are working inside our trees that are certified. We have people that are spraying that are certified. They are knowing what they're doing. So we want to make sure that, we're going to make sure that like with the company we have now, we do a monthly meeting on certain trimmings that we're going to do on certain types of plants. You know, with we're going to trim creosotes different than what we trim the lantanas. Isaac kind of mentioned about the 150 trees we lose each year, but each year, if we're not actually going out there and structurally thinning through the trees, as you can see, we might have majestic mesquite that's over on the corner here, and we might lose half that tree. The tree might not be dead, but it's not providing what we need for our landscape. It's not giving us the shade that we want, taking in the oxygen that we want, and it's not structurally attractive anymore. And so it's going to take many years to get that back up to the level what we need it to be. And establish a budget for the storm damage. It's something each year that, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. You know, so a storm can come out and wipe out a budget that we don't have money to go out there and structurally trim these trees and take care of them. So what are our challenges? One of the big things is we have an aging irrigation systems. I mean, some of these systems, I think Priest Yard is 35 years old. I mean, we have a lot of issues with these irrigation systems to provide adequate water to the landscape that we have out there also, and to be wise with the water that we're using. With the landscape, with the right-of-ways, a lot of the issues that we have is the heat island. It's surrounded by asphalt, sidewalks, all kinds of different things. So we want to provide more trees out there to reduce that heat island out there. And one thing that's very unique with my particular situation is we want to provide shade for our residents on the wide sidewalks, and we want our residents to go out and enjoy their bicycles, but we also want our vehicles, our city buses, our fire engines to have access to our roadways. So we have to make sure that we're trimming these trees up high enough so they can make these clearings. And one thing we keep on talking about storm damage is establishing a budget for it. As we invest money into our landscape, one of the issues that we have to address is if we plant a tree, we just can't walk away from it. To get the beautiful ficus trees that we have around City Hall right now, it took years of maintenance, proper trimming, proper irrigation. All these things are one big giant tool that we need to do as we move forward. Thank you at this time. That has been our presentation. We'd love to hear feedback or any questions that anybody has.
Well, thanks, guys. Good presentation. And everybody, I think, has recognized that the quality of the landscaping has really improved in the last several years, and it's hard work, I know. I was wondering about the goal, though. So we know how this works. We're relatively new to this, and we set kind of a generic goal, which is we'll be better than whatever the average is of other cities. And then we find out that the average of other cities is only half the people think that the landscaping is attractive. We're already at 63%? 63%. So the city council approved that goal of the benchmark cities not knowing what it might be. So do you think there's an opportunity to go back to the city council and say, oh, by the way, the benchmark is only 50%. We're already at 63. Are you guys okay if we invest a little less in the next several years and get down to that 50%? I think the answer would probably be no. So do you think, is there an opportunity to go to them and say, forget what the other cities are. If the other cities think that half of the people thinking that the landscape looks good is okay, we don't think that. What do you want us to set as a goal? Do you think there's an opportunity for that?
I believe there's certainly an opportunity for that. One of the challenges that we run into in terms of being able to tie this survey or tie the percentages and the numbers to the survey is twofold. One is the ability to be able to talk about landscape in general and the landscape that Sean is responsible for. So that number really is, that's in the community survey, is kind of hard to wrap your arms around, if you will. So I would recommend and suggest to Don and Shelley, of course, is to be able to have a goal or some sort of a performance measure that is tied to what we have complete control over in terms of making sure that, okay, so we have X number of square footage, 7.5 million square feet. Out of that, how much of that have we improved? Or we have X number of lineal feet of right-of-way that falls under our responsibility. How do we put percentages towards that? That way we have complete control over that versus a survey that someone takes or residents take, and in their mind, because it's not specific, I don't believe in the survey, it's not specific to, and they wouldn't know whether it's the shaded blue that I talked about in the GIS map, or their neighbor or the Walmart down the street. So that would be something that we can bring back to the table and say, look, this is the approach that we would take to be able to manage that more effectively from a survey standpoint.
Hello, Isaac. Thank you for your information. It's very informative. My question is that you do mention that there are areas that the city doesn't have full control over, but you work closely with code compliance when there are issues. How is your area basically encouraging better maintenance before code compliance to achieve your goal?
That's something that Sean, for the most part, works closely with code compliance. I don't know, Sean, if you want to talk about that experience.
If I understand what you're saying is, if it's an area that is owned by the city and code comes to me, will we get it addressed quickly, or if it's?
No, I think what he's saying is if you're working in those blue areas adjacent to other areas that are visible to the public and you see something that looks like it could be improved by a commercial property owner or a residential, what steps are you and your team taking before code gets involved to maybe say, hey, we're over here working on this. Is this an opportunity for you to maybe do something about are you doing things like that?
Yeah. If I'm out in the field and I happen to notice something, I'll go talk to a business owner. I have code compliance on speed dial. If I notice something that's, if there's an abundant amount of weeds or anything out there, yeah, I'll get it addressed really quickly. So we work very closely together.
One of the challenges that we have, of course, is managing managing your front yard or your backyard is challenging enough for one person, for the family. Imagine trying to manage 7.5 million with this team right here. We count on working closely with code compliance staff to be able to work together in being able to achieve those or reach out to those business owners and put the onus on the adjacent property owners to make sure that they're doing what they need to do in terms of bringing up their landscape or keeping their landscaping luscious and clean or maintained.
Great presentation. So one of the things that I've seen some in the year that I've been here is that some people's idea of what a nice landscape is pretty subjective. And in different areas of the city, there are different ideas about what the landscaping should look like. So people's idea of what Warner should look like is different from what Scottsdale Road, north of the lake should look like versus what Curry should look like in Papago Park. And Sean, I think you do a really good job of trying to figure out what makes sense in terms of the context of that your particular landscapes are in. But I just want to ask you, do you think that sometimes some of this is communicating to residents about why we're making the certain landscape decisions that we're making, that some of the landscapes you put in are water sensitive, are good for pollinators, produce habitat, but maybe they don't look great in the summer months, or maybe they're more oriented for fall and spring and not as much for winter and summer. Is there more that we could be doing to make sure that we're communicating with residents the decisions we're making, why we're making them, and that sometimes from a visual perspective, it might not always look like the perfect landscape when in our mind, because we're shooting for water and urban heat island and pollinators and biodiversity, it is a good landscape?
Well, that's a great question. And yes, it's going out and talking with residents. Once I first took this job, I didn't realize how often our residents or how involved our residents are about the landscape. I mean, they're very active, and we have long discussions on a regular basis. Yeah, reaching out. I mean, when we did Scottsdale Road, we reached out to the community on North Tempe. When we did Alameda, we reached out to the community. We had a open meeting over at the library, so anybody had any questions, why we're putting certain plants in. Can we always do more? Yes, always. Everybody that gets a card, my card gets my cell number, and they say, give me a call on that.
Talk about how great you are, and then ask Isaac some hard questions. So, Sean, you have done, I think Ken did a really nice job with the first salvo of throwing compliments at you, because you have taken this thing from really nothing into something very aspiring, seriously. So if Andrew said to you, hey, Sean, I want to put another $500,000 or $1 million into this, what would be the one thing that you, without influence from me or Shelley or Isaac or anybody else, what would be the one thing you would want to do to this program?
Establish budgets for tree trimming and storm damage. Tree trimming, I kind of hinted on one in the presentation. These trees grow rapidly. I mean, a lot of our desert trees, the mesquites, the palo verdes, they grow rapidly, and we have to have this clearance. And when these trees grow, you know, if anybody's done any treatment at home, and if they have a mesquite or a palo verde, they kind of intertwine and they kind of intermix. We have to get up there and kind of really thin those things out, so when we get the monsoons, the wind kind of goes through, so we don't lose these majestic, beautiful trees that we've worked for years in one storm lose. I mean, we're not guaranteed. If a microburst comes through, we're done. But we are more likely to save majority of that tree if we're on an annual trimming of these trees and making sure that they're thinned out and the winds can kind of go blow through them. That's stand down right there. More money for trees, more money for, and storm damage, I kind of alluded to. A storm can come through and my budget could be gone within a 2-week period. Done, washed out, and any additional things outside my maintenance contract that's not covered, we can't get done. We might have to put on hold or something like that, and it's a shame. Hopefully that answers your question.
And the good thing is I don't have to hear it for the next 2 weeks after the storm, him griping at me, asking for money or where's my budget.
Other questions? You know, you talk a little bit about this metric of the annual community survey, and I think, Isaac, you spoke to maybe some alternative ways of looking at it. You know, we certainly can ask and do ask our residents about their satisfaction with the quality of lots of things, including maybe our streets. But in addition to that, we also have a pavement quality index that gives us an objective measurement as to how do we, you know, there's a way to grade the quality of pavement. Is there not also a way to grade the quality of landscaping so that, taking into account some of what Braden was saying, that if there are variations in different, let's say, just for the sake of being simple about it, character areas, you break the city up into 8 areas and say, how do we do in our own, for our stuff, our right-of-way, our buildings, how can, I mean, does it lend itself to some objective criteria that might be helpful to say, this looks like an 80 versus a 50?
Absolutely. You mentioned the pavement quality index, and like the PQI, we obviously on a yearly basis, we survey our roadway system. This would be no different. We would survey our right-of-way landscape maintenance in terms of saying, okay, how many trees do we have this year? How many trees do we have the next year? How many plants? What does our DG look like? And so there's a survey that, or there's a metrics and numbers that you can put together, and on a yearly basis, be able to survey that to see where you're at. You know, are you trending upward, or are you trending downward, and continue to work off of that. But currently, we do not have something like that in place.
Would something like that perhaps be a metric that we should look at in the future? I'm not saying you don't, I mean, because there's probably some correlation, right? I mean, if we spend, I mean, like I said, another $1 million, and we do have something about trees, and the citizen satisfaction survey goes down by 10 points, they may tell you that perhaps our efforts in trees are not where the money should be spent, maybe. Or maybe it's an outlier. You look over a course of years, and I'm just suggesting that maybe there's a mix of ways that we could actually determine whether or not what we're doing has the effect that we think that it does.
And I think Sean talked to it a little bit in terms of making sure that we set aside a certain budget to be able to do these surveys, to be able to gauge where we're at in terms of our right-of-way, where we're at with the assessments that we do on a yearly basis. It would be nice to say and look back at our data and say, okay, last year, here's where we were. The year before last, here's where we were. Working off of a 2010 assessment obviously isn't a smart thing. It's very difficult to make data-driven decisions based on that. So if we had the ability to survey our right-of-ways on a yearly basis, we would be able to establish those performance metrics, establish those data-driven decisions to be able to allow us to move forward.
Now, obviously, we didn't create the PQI. It's a metric that is a national standard. Are there national standards for quality of public right-of-way landscaping or landscaping in general that we could utilize?
That I know of. I don't think there is, Sean.
I don't know of any. Yeah.
So I didn't mean to imply that your measure isn't good before. I think this is the appropriate measure. I think you wouldn't do anything in the right-of-way unless you were trying to do it so that the residents were happy with the right-of-ways in the neighborhoods where they lived. I think this is a good measure, and your comment that some of it is out of our control, we have a lot of performance measures that some of it is out of our control, but I think if you're doing what you can with the city-owned landscape and the resident satisfaction still isn't high enough, then it becomes a code compliance issue because the commercial or the residential isn't up to par. But that's what they want. The residents don't want us to say, regardless of what you think, it's meeting our standards. The residents want to say, I think this is the right of way I want to see in my neighborhood. I think the performance measure you have is good. I just think that it was established prior to actual measurement. And now we know what the measurement is. If you said to the city council, is what you're hearing from the residents now sufficient? And they said yes, then say, well, then let's set it at 63. We don't want to ever fall below this. This is sufficient. I think it's a good measure to ask the residents, and it is objective because they're not making up answers. They're looking around where they drive every day, and they're either liking it or not liking it. And I think it's a very good measure.
But I think the way that you explained that, I think, makes a point that I think is helpful in a larger organizational sense, which is when a resident drives around the city, they're not necessarily distinguishing between what we maintain and what someone else maintains. So what we know is this metric and our success of this metric is not fully dependent upon the activities of your group, because you guys can be doing a stellar job, but if the rest of, let's say, for instance, if code compliance isn't keeping up with the violations, that number may stay low regardless of whether or not we put in another $500,000 for trees or not. So the suggestion I was making, and just a suggestion about creating our own LQI maybe, is that at least that's something that's wholly within your control, right? You're only grading that which we maintain. And we know that has some value, at least in terms of whether or not you are within your group hitting or not hitting the point at which you think you should be as an overall system. Just as with PQI, we don't control the ability for a lot of gated neighborhoods and how often they maintain their pavement or private parking lots. We may hear about it and say, well, why aren't you doing something? But that goes more to a code question than it does the private property, public property distinction. So anyway, it's just.
That's a good point. And the LQI, I'm going to coin that now, is certainly important. I think when we started this program in 2013, we were obviously basing it off of the 2010 assessment that was done, and it was given a number by saying, hey, this landscape in this location or this portion rates at X number. So that's how we would prioritize the location where we would revitalize that portion of landscape. On the way here, Sean and I were talking about what kind of questions are we going to get from the audience, and that was one of them in terms of thinking, okay, if we have our own LQI performance measure, what is it that we're doing in terms of working with code compliance to be able to make sure that we're driving in the same direction? And I think, Sean, in terms of working closely with code compliance, that piece is there. But in terms of knowing and understanding what the performance measure is for code compliance, if we can both work in the same direction, then I think we could probably get that number, obviously increase in trend, continue to trend upward.
No question. Right. That number is taking into account forces that go beyond just what you and your team can do. Not that you don't play a significant role in that, absolutely. And I will add my voice to the chorus of folks here who have seen the difference that you guys are doing. I mean, I drive these streets every day, and what I'm seeing in the medians and along the right of way is really just some terrific work. It's stuff I can be very, very proud of. And I think residents of Tempe can be very proud of as well. So, well done. Anybody else?
Isaac, so I was hearing a little bit about, your desire to have a more frequency of your survey to be, annual or even real time. And then I hear that there's how involved the community is in wanting to see the right-of-ways being kept nice and the landscaping fresh. So I'm thinking, put those two together, and have you thought about maybe using a data collector with our GIS system to leverage the public and give them an app so that they and some sort of a survey tool where they can constantly kind of watch their neighborhoods, the right-of-ways near their neighborhoods, to keep that survey up to date for you. I mean, and make it a community effort.
I'm going to defer that question to Stephanie, but she left the room already. She is, oh no, she's back there. So I know Stephanie and I have talked about having that same kind of survey on the graffiti side to be able to survey via GIS tool on the graffiti side, but this process would be no different in terms of making sure that when they do have some sort of an app saying that you can make a comment, but only in this blue shaded area on the GIS system, I mean, that would I think work. That would be something that we could work with Stephanie a little bit further. Thank you.
We can do that.
I just wanted to piggyback on a very important point you made, Isaac. First, both of you did a great job, and it's amazing work, really, quite frankly, with the minimal resources that I think you both have, quite frankly. You mentioned what is the most important thing is working with code enforcement and working perhaps collaboratively to look at if they had the performance measure and you are all working at strategies that kind of advance both your performance measures. You just hit on why we even created Tempe Accelerates or strategic management. It's the breaking down of the silos and divisions working together, less divisions and more collaborative team effort from departments to departments. And I hope it resonated with the folks here, because I think that is kind of the aha moments that we get to witness as strategic management that perhaps others haven't, but that is taking place. So I really thank you for making that point. The other thing is Chris Tatham from the ETC Institute, who conducts the survey, mentioned some of the gold star performance measures, like yourselves, that you just outdid the target. And he recommended perhaps keeping these and making it the top 10% nationally, that we are exceeding a lot of the things nationally. City just is doing very well. But some of these that he recommended, perhaps working with departments on looking at, instead of the average, national average, the top 10%, which would be interesting to see where this would land. So just something to think about.
Anyone else? All right, thank you. Great job. Okay, well, we're going to be concluding just a bit early today, but again, thank you for your presence and participation here. And reminder about having the survey forms in the back of the room for both presenters, both teams of presenters, for them to take that back. If you could grab one of those and fill them out before you go, that would be great. And again, those of you who are here, I see some faces who have been here for multiple of these, some who are here for the first time. But keep on encouraging people from any work group that you know of to come to these. This is not an exclusive, invitation-only event. Everyone's invited. All levels of the organization are invited. The more people we have here listening to this and hearing and giving feedback, and then telling other people about their experience here and what they're hearing is going to be good. So we're going to keep on doing this, although this is the last one of 2017. So we'll meet you all again here in January. Is it the 18th? 11th. January, I was off by 1 week. January 11th, we'll be here at 2 p.m. with 2 more. And again, I hope we're going to continue to push this out to all employees to get them out here to hear this. I think it's a real valuable exercise. And I know that the groups who I presented have really appreciated the feedback. So those of you who gave the feedback already, great. Those who haven't, and even if you want to have additional comments, please fill it out. The surveys are in the back. All right, thanks.